Hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Horror House, episode 27. Today we're just going to have probably a bit of a shorter episode than usual, but an episode where I am basically just going to be giving my thoughts on a particular topic that has sort of been in my mind over the past few weeks since a piece of news came out surrounding all of this. This episode is probably going to be more in the style of a ramble from the Enlightenment Hour rather than a normal or quote-unquote normal episode of Horror House. But yes, today I did want to talk a bit about the Conjuring series, as I see it, the 2010s best horror franchise, certainly the most well known, and with sort of the spin-offs it already has, in the sense of the first Annabelle film and the new this year at least, not out in wide release yet, but I know a few people that have seen it and have been singing the praises of the second Annabelle film, Annabelle Creation, which sort of surprised me at the fact that that's been getting pretty positive reviews for the most part. So ultimately, I am now excited to see that. I believe it's got a mid-August release date, at least in the UK. So yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to that. But yes, mainly why I wanted to talk just a bit about this particular topic today. And like I said, this episode, I don't think will be too long. I just really felt like this was worth a sort of more rambly type episode. It was the piece of news that came out a couple of weeks ago now, surrounding James Wan, of course, creator, director of the Conjuring series, and of course Saw and all that stuff. A great horror director, there's no doubt, especially a great modern horror director. He's certainly probably the biggest name in horror directing today. But a piece of news came out about the fact that he might not direct the third Conjuring film. In the Conjuring series proper. For Conjuring 1, Conjuring 2, obviously Conjuring 3, the Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga films, basically. I'm not talking about any Annabelle film or any other future spin-off that has been announced for The Conjuring just yet. But yeah, I heard it was reported that James Wan may not be directing The Conjuring 3. And ultimately, to put it as simple as I can put it, I just thought, well, why not? Because either this means that The Conjuring 3 might not, the idea for The Conjuring 3, which I believe is supposed to be something to do with a werewolf case. I don't know if that's been confirmed, but I do believe that has been reported for quite some time now. Probably, I think since last year, since the second Conjuring film came out. The third one has been reported to be something to do with werewolves or lycanthropy, and the Warrens take on, a case of that. But I find myself thinking, well, why is James Wan, a director who has, directed the first two Conjuring films and directed them very well, they're both very, very good horror films, why wouldn't he be doing the third one? And I know that it may be the case that Um, he will obviously probably still be on as some sort of producer, and I know he tends to be at least a very quite hands-on producer. But I can't help wondering why he wouldn't take the directing job again, and maybe he wants to give his protege David F. Sandberg, director of Lights Out, maybe he wants to give him a chance at directing The Conjuring. I think it might actually be David F. Sandberg who is directing Annabelle Creation. Don't quote me on that, but I think it might be. If I'm completely wrong, please tell me I'm completely wrong there. But so yeah, maybe James wants to give David Sandberg a chance at sort of a bigger horror film, because The Conjuring as a series, as a franchise, is certainly the biggest horror franchise we have today. It's the most sort of well known. I know people that don't watch horror films, don't keep up with all the wacky small horror films that we always get. They know the Conjuring series, because like people would know the Saw film series, like people would know the Nightmare on Elm Street film series. More people are going to know the name The Conjuring rather than whatever, the name Don't Breathe, for example, of last year. You ask someone, have you heard of Don't Breathe? Then you ask The Conjuring. 9 times out of 10, if they are relatively interested in watching any sort of film, they will be familiar with The Conjuring, at least as a name. So it is, the biggest horror franchise out there, and James Wan being such a well-regarded and well-known horror director, I think to not, keep with his franchise, basically, that he brought to the screen in the first place, for him to not stick with directing it, I think, it leaves me with a slight sour taste, just an inkling of a thought that this third film, I don't know what necessarily stage of development it's in, but it just gives me that little niggling feeling that the third one might not exactly be what James Wan is interested in, and I trust James Wan over anybody completely when it comes to this series of films, because why wouldn't you? He's already made 2 very, 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 very good, simply, but popular horror films as well. And horror as a genre can be, either regarded as the lowest of the low sometimes, especially in, not necessarily the last couple of years, but the years before that. But it all just makes me ever so slightly concerned about the future of this franchise, because I think it is a great representation of horror for the masses. Most horror, of course, is, sort of created for horror fans, at least smaller horror and, independent horror. But the Conjuring series is a very mass appeal horror franchise. Now, just speaking about the spin-offs as well, which is also what I want to bring up in this whole rambly, ridiculous thing right now. These spin-offs, it has been announced that, aside from, of course, the second Annabelle film, Annabelle Creation, out in August, that there will be two other, I believe at this point, two other Conjuring spin-off films called The Nun and The Crooked Man, based on, of course, both characters from The Conjuring 2. Now, I don't believe that Vera Farmiga or Patrick Wilson or anyone like that will be involved in acting in those films. So with the first Annabelle film at least being not well regarded by anyone, really. I mean, the early reviews coming out of Annabelle Creation have certainly improved my outlook on the Conjuring spin-offs, and it is now, like I said, a film that I am certainly looking forward to seeing in a couple of months, or 1.5 months, whenever. But the characters they are focusing on in these spin-offs, the Nun and the Crooked Man, it just, at least to me, it just does not seem like there's a great deal of story to be told there, especially with the character of the nun, who in the second Conjuring film was there, purely to basically haunt Lorraine Warren, Vera Farmiga's character. Now, if Vera Farmiga is not going to be in the Nun, as it's called, Lorraine Warren is not going to be in the Nun. So how exactly is a nun film going to work without the person who the nun is in the imagination of? The nun is a character in the second Conjuring film that, is a representation of Lorraine Warren's fears. And it haunts her and only her. So I have absolutely no idea, unless their idea is to make some sort of strange film where this character of the nun, I forget its actual name, I believe it began with a V. Someone will know, I'm sure. Please tell me that as well. But unless they make some sort of strange film where the nun travels around America just haunting various people, or the nun previously haunted someone else but is now haunting Lorraine Warren, which wouldn't make sense either, because the whole point of the nun is, fundamentally linked to Lorraine Warren. It makes little sense to me how a nun film could work without Lorraine Warren. And we know that Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are not going to be appearing in the spin-offs. Ed and Lorraine Warren appear in the Conjuring films proper. Of course, 2012's The Conjuring, 2013's the first Conjuring. That's going to annoy me now. Let's say 2012. First Conjuring, 2012. If it's not 2012, it's 2013. And of course, 2016's Conjuring 2, that is what they appear in, and they will be appearing in the Conjuring 3, which, as we are aware of now, James Wan may perhaps not be directing. Now, it's not been confirmed that he isn't directing The Conjuring 3, but it has not been confirmed that he is either. And, you know, the piece of news that did come out was that it was sort of slightly more likely that James will not be directing the third Conjuring. And of course, he's got other, he has got other films now. Of course, he is the director of Aquaman for the DC universe. So that's out in 2018. So he has, he still has a good number of months working on that. And, if perhaps, because Aquaman is certainly, it's a film that pretty much every movie fan is looking forward to. Some would say surprisingly, but I think it's safe to say that. And, if that proves to be a success, DC, might want to bring might want to make James Wan more involved in what they do going forward. Have him in the big room full of the head creatives at DC, the Jeff Johns, the hopefully Patty Jenkins, and people like that. Joss Whedon, for example, Zack Snyder, if he does decide to perhaps come back after the family tragedy, which I wouldn't blame him for not doing, but we're not here to talk about Zack Snyder or DC really. But I think it's a necessary thing to be brought up, with the fact that James Wan might see himself become more involved in DC, and therefore, will have to be less involved in making the Conjuring films, which is interesting because for horror fans that might be a shame. I mean, for movie fans in general, those who just love watching film, it's not really gonna be a great deal of concern for them, just as long as James Wan is working, because he's a great filmmaker. It doesn't matter what he's working on necessarily, but I do think that if he is, I don't want to use the word forced, but if he sees a better opportunity to be more of a creative force behind, of course, a bigger franchise that the DC universe is. If he sees that opportunity, and to become a pretty major player in all that, then it'd make sense for him to step, a bit further away from a series like The Conjuring. And like I did say before, he has got David F. Sandberg, who is like I said, the director of Lights Out and maybe the director of Annabelle Creation. I'm going to have to look that up now. Is David F. Sandberg the director of Annabelle Creation? Yes, he is. So you've got him there as well. He's essentially James Wan's protege, and I do think like this is where it gets interesting, because from the good reviews that Annabelle Creation is getting, with David F. Sandberg directing and James Wan producing, if Annabelle Creation, for the purpose of this podcast, if Annabelle Creation turns out to be something I personally enjoy, then I don't think it will be as big of a problem if it is the same director-producer team for the third Conjuring. If you do give Sandberg the third Conjuring film, and James stays on, you know, as producer, I think that'll be much less of an issue for everyone. Because I would have more, I would certainly have faith in that, because Sandberg is, you know, slowly proving himself with this whole horror thing. But still, you know, still that feeling is there in me, at least for now, which is why I did want to talk about this particular topic in this sort of very, very casual, rambly kind of way. It's, you know, this is my pure thoughts. You know, it is why for now, at least, that James Wan's name not being attached to the directing chair of The Conjuring 3 is, you know, isn't exactly my favourite thing. Now, I don't know when The Conjuring 3 is coming out exactly. I don't believe it's got a set release date. I just think it's one of the in development type projects. I mean, presumably it will be 2018, or at least, you know, at most 2019. 2019, I think, is perhaps more likely, especially, you know, you've got Annabelle Creation coming out later this year, and mind you, I do not know when. I don't think the Nun or the Crooked Man, these spin-offs, I don't think they have, you know, set release dates either. I think they're about in the same sort of stage that the third Conjuring film is in. So I've no idea when these films are necessarily going to come out, but at least for me, it all hinges on whether I like Annabelle Creation, whether I'd be happy with a, you know, James Wan in a producing role, and then David F. Sandberg in the director's chair. Yeah, but moving back onto the spin-offs, I think the question is worth asking: is Sandberg now going to take over, essentially, at least in terms of directing, if he's doing creation? And no, this isn't by any chance telling anyone that he is directing The Conjuring 3. I just think that if James Wan isn't directing The Conjuring 3, I think the only other reasonable name is David F. Sandberg. You know, if he does direct that, does he also then maybe direct one of the other spin-offs? Because does he essentially almost completely take over directing from James Wan as James Wan's protege, which he is? Because Lights Out, of course, from last year, David F. Sandberg's first feature, I believe, was a James Wan production. So that's another interesting point. Will Sandberg essentially just morph into James Wan and just become the next James Wan? Because I certainly think it's possible, especially if the eventuality comes out, that James Wan becomes more involved with the DC films, which, you know, from how excited most people are about his Aquaman film, you know, seems perhaps likely. So yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts on this whole topic. I did say that this wouldn't be a particularly long episode, but I hope you did enjoy this very, very casual, more rambly, pure thoughts type episode. Today, please let me know what you think about this whole discussion, this whole topic, please. I would love to talk to anyone who listens about this. It's something that really sort of, I don't want to say it's playing on my mind, but it's something I'm thinking about, because The Conjuring as a series is, you know, is for the mass audience. It represents the horror genre today, and I only want what's best for the genre. So, yeah, please do feel free to tweet, of course, at HorrorHouse, at HorrorHousePod on Twitter. Follow the podcast there. Use the hashtag HorrorHousePod as well to carry on these conversations. What do you think about the spin-offs as well, not just the whole situation with James? What do you think about the spin-offs? How can they make those spin-offs successful? What do we think of David F. Sandberg? Do we think he could, you know, as James Wan's protege, do we think he could be the next James Wan? As always, guys, you can find me on Twitter at the Purple Don. Again, follow the podcast at HorrorHousePod. If you are on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever it's called these days, please leave a rate and review over there if you're feeling ever so generous, and subscribe to the feed. Or if you are on YouTube, please sub to this channel for this podcast and for the Enlightenment Hour, plus plenty of other stuff every now and again. The Enlightenment Hour is becoming ever wonderful, I think, as is this show. I do very, very much enjoy speaking into this microphone, basically. I very, very much enjoy speaking into this microphone about whatever topic I want to talk about, which is just wonderful. The latest episode of the Enlightenment Hour was a wonderful top 5 Game of Thrones characters with odd-shaped channels. Kimber Barrett, who we all should know by now at least. You know, big favourite of this podcast, big favourite of all things me. And so yes, definitely go and check that out. You can also, of course, find that podcast feed on iTunes as well as the YouTube channel. The YouTube is, of course, the main hub of everything, though. But yes, as always, guys, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.